Hey, hey, hey! Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? Today, we are here with Emmanuel. I'm not alone. Hey, Emmanuel, how are you?
Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm very excited about this. What about you?
Nice. I am, yeah. This stream that we're doing today, it was actually Emmanuel's idea because Emmanuel, if you know him already, he's been involved with the Wiz community for a long time. And there's been a few people from the community who's asked, like, "Hey, how was Wized built? Like, we want to know. We're curious about it." And we thought, "Hey, let's just jump in a technical live stream on a Friday and talk about it." And I see there's a bunch of people already interested in this. So let me say hi to everyone here. Hey, Wizdev. Hello, Fred, Himanshu, Rashid, Ferdy, Datapad, Johnny. Good to see you all. I love seeing uh, the same faces every single week. I love it. Hey, Nicola, too. Okay, great.
They don't miss a
So
single stream.
yeah. There's some people who is always here with me, and I love it because it means that there's people who wants to learn more things. We're in the Webflow ecosystem. We're working mainly with Webflow, but there are many ways that you can improve your career, your skills. Either if it's with custom coding or custom styling or just thinking about new tools that could be used with Webflow to build things like Wist, which we're talking about today. So I love it. There's quite a lot of interest in these kind of things, and hopefully we'll keep growing. Okay, let me keep saying hello to a bunch more people. Hey there, Shil. Hey, and you said hola, hola. Okay, so let me make a quick intro, and I think that we'll just jump right into it because there's a lot of things to talk about today. So, as you may already seen in the title, today we are talking about how Wist was built. So we're gonna do an intro first for whoever does not know what the hell is Wist. We're gonna show you that, and we'll explain all the different moving parts of Wist. So, you know, from the smallest piece in the mechanism to what Wist is as an app that you can use. We'll try to at least, we're not going to teach you how to build Wiz, but so you understand everything that goes on behind the curtain. Today we're doing this open live stream. You already know it. We're doing some Fridays open live streams, and then some other Fridays we're doing closed live streams only for Finsweet Plus users. In those closed live streams, we always go more in depth. So whenever we're opening a topic, and there's people who want to learn more, they want to go more advanced, maybe they're building something similar and they want to get some feedback from me, or from the rest of the community who's joining. Those Finsweet Plus sessions are perfect for them. So if you want to keep diving deeper after this live stream, let me know because we're going to do private sessions with the Finsweet Plus community. Okay, great. Hey, Glenn. Hey, Aga. Hey, oh my god, I don't know how to pronounce this. Okay, don't hate me. Um, great. So, Emmanuel, do you want to say anything before we start?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I wanted to say is that what you were talking about before with people diving deeper into the technical side of things, I think this is absolutely great because with all the digital skills, one and one is four. The more skills you have, they kind of compound on top of each other. And by getting more technical, it just opens so many opportunities. So, yeah, really, really excited about this type of content. And I'm so happy that we're having so many excited viewers or followers, so to say, that come on these streams. So, yeah, without any further ado, let's start.
Great. How about we do an overview first of what's Wist? I prepared here a simple project to just showcase things that can be built with Wist. But essentially, Wist, can we share the screen, Gabe? Essentially, Wist, it's a product that you can put on top of your Webflow projects to add more interactivity to them. So you essentially take what's a static site, which is generated with Webflow. You can see here the Webflow project, It's just a static site, like where you're building something like a marketing site or whatever. In Webflow, you are creating HTML and CSS. Everything's static, right? So if I try to use this, it wouldn't do anything. Wized is an additional product that adds a layer of interactivity on top of your sites. In here, I have an example of this. So let me refresh this. Essentially, we created here a way of selecting columns and rows. I built this demo a while ago for a Twitter thread. I can't remember exactly what was happening, but this is just a quick example of things that you could do with Wist. You essentially can do most mostly what you could do with a traditional framework like React or Vue or Svelte, but you work with the base of the Webflow project. So you design the site with Webflow, and then you add the interactivity using Wist. So here we've got a bunch of actions. We'll talk about this. We've got requests in case that you will need to learn to load data or send data to a server. We've got the different integrations to help you do that, etc. So, by the way, maybe we could even share this in case that somebody wants to play around with it. How about we put it in the chat? How can I do that, Gabe? Can you do it? It's with dash columns dash rows dot webflow.io. I don't know if somebody can write it in the chat. That would be nice. So that's the kind of the overview of Wiz. Most of you already know it. So if you're in this stream, you kind of know it and you're interested in how is it built. Okay, so any questions so far, Emmanuel?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question that will help beginners shed a bit more light on Wist. So, what's the difference between what Wist can do and what you could do with make.com or Zapier?
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, this is a confusion that happens quite often because obviously with Wiz you cannot do everything. The main goal of Wiz is handling the interactivity on the browser. So on your website, everything related to updating elements or or loading content or sending content to a server, etc. So all of this happens on the browser. The user loads your site, with it's also loaded on the side, and it powers all this interactivity that it's happening on the side. Okay, kind of like if you were writing just JavaScript, but Wist is a tool that helps you do it in a more efficient way. Um, Make and Zapier and all these services are a bit different because they handle processing data on a server. So with Make, you can trigger different workflows, like maybe, for example, when you submit a form or you target an endpoint or whatever, you are triggering a workflow that does something. And that's not really happening on the user's browser. This is just happening on Mix or Zapier servers. Maybe it could be something like, hey, when we make this updating our database, trigger this workflow, take this data, mutate it, and then send it to Airtable. I don't know. There are many, many things that you can do with those tools, but they are not strictly related to Wiz. The connection that is between these tools is that with Wiz, you could interact with them. With Wiz, essentially, as a very global summary, you can do two things. You can work with the page, so you can update, mutate, move around, whatever with the elements on the page, and you can load and send data to a server. So if your server it's a Zapier endpoint, that also works. You could be sending and triggering a Zapier workflow using Wiz, for example. Um, Did I solve the question with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to sum it up to the best of my abilities. So basically, Wist is used for adding interactivity to your site, to responding in real time to different events that happen when the user clicks a button, when the user types something, etc. And we can send requests and get responses from and to the server. So we could request data from our backend, from make.com, from Zapier, etc., and display that live without having to refresh the page. Would that be a good summary?
Yeah, and it's mostly kind of like Darshil is saying. It's a front end framework, West. So everything that you could do with a front end framework, anything that you could do with vanilla JavaScript that you add on your Webflow side, or with React or Vue as well, whatever you're building, kind of you can do it with West too. So, and obviously, if you think about that, maybe it's easier to understand. Like West, it's the React of Webflow. Like it's a framework that you can use on a Webflow site to power it up and add interactivity. Okay, great. How about we start breaking Wiz down? Shall we do it?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. I think that we should start by asking the question like, what happens between creating the project on Webflow and then setting it up in Wist, creating actions and requests in Wist, and then suddenly that's working already in your project, right? So if we open this is the live site, the Webflow live site. So this is the Wiz dash columns dash rows .webflow.io, and this live site, as you can see, obviously we can use what we created inside Wist here, right? So essentially, there are a few moving parts that allow us to do this inside Wist. So let's pull Scally Draw here and let's do some drawings. So essentially, the main part of Wist, it's a library. So it's some JavaScript library that we have created that you embed on your side, which powers Wist. And that's what we call actually the embed. So the embed, it's the runtime, what's powering Wist. This is your Webflow site, like that. Let's call this my site.webflow.io. Okay. And in this site, there are two things that we ask you to set up when you create a project. We could actually go ahead and, oh no, we can find it here. There's this embed code that we ask you to slap on the project, which is, one second, all of this. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. I know that it's a bit big. Let's make it smaller so it's easier to see. But there are two scripts that we ask you to add on the page. One script is the runtime. Okay. One script is the embed, which is this that is being loaded, this one from below. And then there's another script that is the configuration. Okay. So there's a distinction between these two. So let's do it here. One thing is the embed runtime. And another thing, it's the embed config. The embed config. Okay. These two are required together. So you cannot use one without the other. The embed runtime, it's the library that essentially powers up everything. So it's the embed runtime. It's like the car, right? And the embed config, it's the person who's driving the car. It's who's telling the runtime what it needs to do, right? So the idea is that anytime that you create something with Wist, let's call this the configurator. We'll talk about this in a second, but like this, I think that will explain the overall thing on how it works. The configurator, not configuration, but configurator, like that. This is what you see right here. Okay, the configurator, it's where you define all the actions. Let's look at an action, for example. Let's see that maybe this plus button, when we click on it, we want to run a function in this case, or the selected rows, which is displaying the amount of selected rows. In this case, for example, I have 2 and 2, like 2 rows and 2 columns. This, we are updating these elements in here because we have an action that targets this specific element, and then it renders that data. So we give it the information, okay? All this information, whenever we publish it, so whenever this goes live to the site, Wiz, what it does is it generates a config. It generates this embed config that it sends it to a CDN. Okay, so this goes to a CDN. To text CDN, yay, like that. Okay, and whenever any user loads the site, this comes directly from the CDN. So this goes in here like that. Okay, so this is mostly the how the embed works. Well, the two embeds, the runtime and the config. We'll dive deeper now in a second in how is everything built, but that's the main idea. This is essentially how things work. Actually, I'm missing something here, and it's that there is another stakeholder in place, that it's the server. We've got a dedicated server to do this kind of things. So server like that. Okay. So really what happens is that the configurator tells the server, hey, there's this new config, and the server goes ahead and publishes the config. And then anytime that a user loads it, it loads the config like this. Okay. Is it making sense so far? Am I confusing people? Let me see the chat.
Well, for me, it makes sense. I can try to summarize what you covered so far. So you said that we have the embed script and we have the configurator script, the embed
Correct.
config and the embed runtime. So the embed runtime would be like jQuery is in Webflow. It's essentially a library, and then the embed config interacts with that library. So that would be the interactions in Webflow that we created, something like that. So if embed runtime would be the jQuery library, the embed config would be the Webflow JS file. And it works in a similar way in Wized.
Yeah, I would go one step further and say that it's not only the jQuery library if we're trying to look for resemblances,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually more, because jQuery, it expects you to use it. Like, for example, here in the console, this is the Waffle side, so I can use jQuery. I could do something like, hey, I want to query this specific element, right? And I want to add a class to it or whatever, right? You have to give in the instructions. In the case of the embed, the instructions are kind of already given. And what the embed does is it reads all the instructions. So it goes through the config, and then it knows, oh, okay, so there's this action that it needs to assign. Let's start it. Then there's this element that when it's loaded, we should do this other action. Let's do it. Then there's this event that it says that when this request finishes, something else should happen. Let's do that too, right? Let's look at the config actually. So the config looks kind of like this. Like this. It's a bit convoluted. Don't worry, it's fine. So how about we grab it and we dump it in a code editor so it's easier to read. Let's format this like that. Okay. So essentially everything is defined through this config. I'm going to close a couple things for now like this, but all your variables are defined like this. All the actions are defined, and you can see how, okay, this specific element, um, whenever this element is found, we know for sure that we want to render a list with it with this specific value, right? And with all these different instructions, this element, when we click on it, we want to run a function that does this. All these actions that are created through the configurator, it's what's then the embed it's picking, and it's initializing one by one to make sure that the whole app is running as it needs. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Nice.
So then this config is first of all created in the Wized configurator. It's being sent to our server where it's being stored, and then it's being sent over to a content delivery network, a CDN, which are servers all over the world, basically, so that it can get accessed by users very quickly.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that this was a very smart way of designing it. I did not come up with this specific design architecture of the serving the embed as a static file, but I think that it's actually super nice because, you know, if every time that a site loaded West, and West had to communicate with our server, like, hey, make an API request, give me the config, initialize it, etc. This would take, it would take some time to do, and also it would take some resources, like because there would be a server that it's constantly uh, receiving inputs and throwing outputs. But with this approach of just having a static file, it's actually super convenient because let's look at it. Look at what happens. Whoops. So what happens is that when the page starts loading, initially, boom, all of this, which is the embed and the config, these two files are in the head. You load them, they come right away, and that's it. They come super quick. So in about 400 milliseconds, Wized is already fully loaded, and usually the page, the Webflow page, hasn't even finished loading completely. So it's very fast to do it, and we've done it in a way that it's async too. So it's not like it blocks the whole page until everything is loaded. This was one of the major changes that I implemented in Embed 2 when we made the whole redesign of Embed 2, and it's that everything is async. So Wist knows exactly how to wait for the config to be loaded, and then how to wait for the runtime to be loaded. And once everything is loaded, start already implementing the functionalities, even if the page hasn't finalized and loading completely, which makes it very fast to start. So you can see here, you can load the page and right away start using it. It doesn't take any amount of time really. It goes super fast. Okay, great. Let me see the comments. Configurator, server, content delivery, network, front end. Nice. Yeah, Freddie, you did the homework. Nice. Yeah. Okay, great. Um, so this is the main idea of the whole setup. Obviously, then now we could start talking about like, okay, but how is the configurator built? How's the server built? What's happening in the CDN? And also, how is the Ember runtime built? You know. But before doing that, Emmanuel, do you want to poke here? Do you want to say anything? Any questions?
No, I think we covered everything pretty much in detail. I would like to dive deeper and continue with the questions.
Yeah, nice. Ferdy is actually asking one question. He's saying,
Mhm.
Alex, can you talk about the modularity? That's a good point. Yeah. So let's inspect again the network requests. Let's go over here. Let's see the JavaScript that is being loaded, which looks like something is happening now. Whoop. Okay, looks like maybe it was my network. But okay, so essentially what you can see here, let's filter by the embed. You can see how it's loading this index.js file, which is the embed runtime entry point, but it's also loading a bunch of chunks, right? These chunks contain different things, but essentially what we've done is we've taken the embed, we've taken this embed runtime, and we've broken it down in multiple modules. So this embed runtime not only contains, it doesn't contain all the code at once, but it's broken down in, okay, element actions and like this, and also event actions, and also requests. And then the requests are also broken down into Firebase requests or Supabase requests or REST requests like this. Okay. So essentially, whenever you load the embed on a page, we don't really load everything. We just load what's necessary for the project that is using it. And I'm going to do a live demo right now so you see the difference. So right now, this project here, it only uses actions, but we don't really have any requests in place. Okay. So right now we're loading the entry point and then we're loading 4 chunks here. But if we implement requests, let me do a dummy request. Let's say test, and this is going to be a REST request, and it's going to be, I don't know, example.com like this. And we just do a simple like any mock request. Let's do this, and I don't know, foo, and it's going to be a get method. Okay. You can see how this is saving. This is going to the server, which is publishing to the CDN again. And now that it's being saved, if we reload the page, you will see how now there is going to be 1 extra chunk because now we are using REST requests, if that makes sense. So now we have 4 chunks, and we should have we should, unless I'm doing something wrong here, we should have an additional chunk. And now it's because of the life, I'm looking bad. But okay. Wait. That's because probably we're not triggering the request. Let me do event page starts loading, and let's perform a request. And this request is going to be the test. Let's make another test. And if we don't succeed, then I'm giving you the wrong explanation. But this is the main concept that we're trying to follow here. So we're breaking down things in modules. Okay. Yeah.
And
Now
there
you
we
can see
go.
how what's happening. Yeah. So it's not until you really need something that we use it, which makes it, smaller in the sense that you just use what's needed. And in this case, REST, it's very small. But let's look at, because REST is just 1 kilobyte. It's very small. But what if we change this to Firebase? Let me just make this up and get item. All good. Let's actually change this. Let's do whatever, like that. Okay, and if we reload this, they should now, whoops, didn't. Okay. If we reload this, you can see how Firebase, it's actually 100 kilobytes because we're using the SDK from Firebase, which is quite a lot, right? And this was one of the problems of Embed 1 that was happening, that everything was shipped to the users and it was like almost 1 megabyte, was pretty big. And instead of that, if you don't use something, we don't ship it to you. That's it. Super simple, super lean too. And I'm gonna get rid of this so we can keep doing stuff.
So
Okay.
basically, the benefit of modularity is that we have faster load times because there's SDKs, software development kits that we are getting from Firebase, Supabase, etc. And it wouldn't make sense to load those if the user doesn't need it.
Correct. Yeah. So and actually, and all these chunks are actually cached. You can see here it really takes very low amount of effort. So the whole library, it's loaded very fast. And yeah, we are just loading what's essential for that particular project. So there's the last JavaScript that it's running, only the optimized, bits that we're actually using. It's what's being used. Um, okay. Ferdy, did I answer your question? I guess so. Okay, great. Any follow-ups, Emmanuel here?
Yeah, so you talked about the architecture so far. Could you talk a little bit about the tech stack that's being used?
Yeah, that's the next thing that we should do. Okay, so here we've got different moving parts as we explained. So we've got the configurator, the server, the CDN, and the embed. Okay, so let's start from the embed in here. This embed essentially it's a custom made library. So everything in the embed it's built from scratch, and it's using TypeScript or JavaScript. In this case we use TypeScript, but it's essentially a JavaScript library, TypeScript library, and we just build it. In this case, in case that anyone is curious, we use the same stack as the developer starter. So we use ES build, and I think that we also use. Actually, let me pull it up because I got it here. And I want to walk everyone through the code base. I think that will be cool. Um, so we've got, I think, da, 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 da. Yeah, for building it, we use ES build, but then for the reactivity, we use actually Vue for it. We use Vue reactivity, and that's very cool. I think that this is something that if you're trying to build a library, you could look at it. Vue reactivity here, this is what powers the proxies that we have in the embed. And let me explain. So essentially in the embed, everything is reactive, right? So when you do, let's look at it. So if we write here Wized.data, the whole state of the application, it's in here. So we've got some variables like that, and we've got some data store about the navigation, we've got data about the inputs, we've got different things going on, right? And everything is reactive. So for example, if I say with dot data dot variables, and let's say result columns, which would be, I think, this. I think this value. If I say result columns equals to 10, look at it. It updates the value in the state, but at the same time, it handles all your activity. So if there's any request condition that it's depending on that, it's going to assess it. If there's an element that it's displaying some data that depends on that, it's going to assess it. If anything that depends on it, the whole reactivity model is going to handle it. And the way that we do it is by using proxies. Um, and obviously, we could have written that from scratch, but Vue actually uses proxies. This is a package from Vue that it's obviously open source and it's powering Vue. So every single Vue application that you see out there, it's actually using this too. And this handles everything related to setting up a proxy, listening for changes to it. Well, effects, what they call it effects. It's essentially like signals. So you've got the state, you've got effects, you've got the right properties which depend on state, etc. And with that, it's how we create all the reactivity in the embed, like that. So Vue reactivity, very cool. And then we've got some other dependencies that help us implement things. But that's essentially the whole, except the reactivity bits for creating proxies and reacting to them. The whole library is built from scratch using TypeScript. I'm going to walk you through that afterwards. Ferdy is saying, what feature that you coded are you the most proud of? Well, I would say that the whole embed. I think that it's pretty performant, and that it's very simple to use and to manage the state, that the way that we designed it like this. So yeah, I'm proud of it. I'm going to show you a few bits that are cool if we have enough time. If we don't have enough time today, remember that we can go more in depth in future live streams for the Finsweet Plus sessions. Okay, let's continue. So this is the embed runtime. Then here in the CDN, this CDN runs in Cloudflare. So here in Cloudflare, we've got different things going on. Okay, so we've got the embed config. It's stored in an R2 bucket. And if you don't know exactly what's R2, it's essentially the same thing as AWS buckets, the S3 buckets, what would be the equivalent, but Cloudflare. So Cloudflare R2 here, you can look at it. It's an object storage. But the good thing is that it's paired with Cloudflare. So we've got the full CDN benefits of hosting files on the CDN and being very close to the users for performance. So we've got this R2, whereas these embed config hosted like that, but we also use Cloudflare workers. So in this particular case, Cloudflare workers, we've got a dedicated worker that what it does is anytime that somebody hits, let's do it two ways. So anytime that a site hits the CDN, first it goes to the worker, okay? And the worker does two things. First of all, it goes and fetches the config, grabs it from the R2 storage, and then before sending that over, actually, no, it does it at the same time. So it does two things. It sends that config to the server, and in the background, it counts a visit. So the page views are counted anytime that a worker is getting a hit to load the embed config, right? And this is happening because we use a setup using another thing from Cloudflare that it's called durable objects. So this is a durable object. And essentially a durable object, it's like a persistent state that you can have in the cloud, in the CDN, that allows you to store data and to quickly respond to things, which allows us to store the counts of each different domain. So we've got these domains that are constantly hitting our CDN. So with this durable object, it's storing all those visits to know exactly how many times a site is loading the config. Am I confusing you more? Because I think I'm starting to draw a lot of lines, and that this might be confusing. But are we following along, everyone in the chat? Emmanuel?
I think it's been relatively easy to follow. Like, I'm sure that some of the users might have some questions, like what are workers?
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially a JavaScript file that lives on the edge on the CDN that that we can use to manipulate the site or whatever we're getting before it's being sent to the client. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And I'm actually going to complicate it a bit more now, okay? Because you may have noticed how. Let's look at the files, the scripts here. These two scripts, one script. Actually, let me duplicate it so it's easier to understand. So one script, it's the config, and another script, it's the embed library. Okay, so these are two different things that are not related one to each other in the terms of how they're being built. The config, it's being generated by the configurator, right? It's a static file that the configurator generates through the server. But the embed library, it's a library that's built from scratch. But these two things are served through the same subdomain. So we've got embed.wiz.com, and then the runtime, it's coming from v2index.js in this case. And the config, it's coming from embed.wiz.com/this. And I'm going to go one step further. And if you're using embed1, so this is the script for embed2, but embed1, the library, it's coming from just embed.wiz.com, right? So we've got a bunch of different things being served from a same domain, right? And the way that we achieve it is because here in this Cloudflare worker, this is acting as a reverse proxy. So this is not only a simple worker that it's responding like an API. This is actually a reverse proxy, because here we are hitting different things. We're hitting to ask for the config. We're hitting to ask for the embed1 library. We're hitting to ask for the embed2 library. And we also have some other internal things for the page business and stuff like that. Okay, so this is acting actually as a reverse proxy. The embed runtime, it's hosted in Vercel. So essentially, we use Vercel to build and deploy the library in this particular case, right? But we don't serve it directly from Vercel. We serve it from Cloudflare. And this is because it knows that when it's asking for, if it's asking for the embed runtime, let's do this in a different color. Let's do these in blue. Then instead of going to the R2 bucket, it goes to the Vercel. It goes to Vercel. It grabs it and it returns it. So Vercel responds this, and then it returns it. So essentially, with this reverse proxy, we can manage the strings of all the different things that are coming in and are going out through this embed.wiz.com domain, if that makes sense. At this point, I think that I might start confusing people, but that's the main idea. Klein is asking one question. Do you use the counts to determine the user's payment plan tier? No, we don't
Yes.
do that. Oh, well, actually, so we don't do that in here. So the embed will never check for the payment of the project, all that stuff, because it's too expensive. We don't want to be doing that every single time that that the embed it's loading, etc. That's happening in the configurator and the server. So anytime that here what we do is that periodically from the server, we go to, whoops. So we know exactly what are the limits. In this particular case, there are two limits, actions or views, right? So from the server, we've got some periodic actions that go ahead and check the projects and compare how many visits those projects are having, because those visits are stored here when we can access it. And in that case, we decide if we want to do something manually. But we don't have for now any automatic flow that stops the embed from working. So actually, if you have a spike of a lot of user visits and stuff like that, your site will never stop working. That's not how it happens. We just check it manually, so we know exactly when a project is going too much out of the amount of views that the subscription allows, and then we decide if we want to reach out to the author or wait a bit more before saying anything, etc. So the main idea is that we never block things right away, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it
Okay.
is used for determining the pricing for a certain user.
Yeah, correct. So essentially
Yeah.
here, when you are managing the plan, you know exactly that, for example, my plan allows 10,000 views because I have a small legacy plan. It's 10,000, or should it be 100,000? I think it's 10,000, right? Um,
100. Yeah.
so, so essentially, here we know how to display it to the user, and also here the configurator, we know how many actions are you using, because obviously the configurator has access to it and it can tell you. Um, but that's it. So the user is the one who decides, like, okay, I'm having all this amount of views, I should be bumping up. If you have a lot of views and you don't have the right plan to it, we're probably also going to reach out to you like, hey, you should probably upgrade the plan of your project because you're going too above the limits of the page views. But that's it. We're not really cutting things. We never want to let people like, we never want a website to stop working because of these kind of things. Himanshu is asking one question. The usage graph overlay shown on the project thumbnail is done by that your durable object? Usage graph overlay shown on project thumbnail.
He's asking about the graph in the project settings. Or actually, it might be the old graph that we had before.
Uh-huh. Maybe, yeah, maybe he means the old graph. But essentially the data is
Yeah.
stored like that. So in the durable object, we store it like this. So first we store it by project, like this, and then we store it by day. So anytime that we kind of visit, we first go in. You can think about it like folders. So we go to the project and then we go to the specific date. So we can count exactly how many day visits are happening every single day, in case that we wanted to provide some logs in the future, if that makes sense. Okay, the one in dashboard previous version. Yeah, correct. He meant the previous
Yeah.
chart. Ferdy is asking, what is the cost to run all these tools? Can you talk more about scaling? Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about that. Let me finish first explaining this, and I think that we can go deeper about the code base and the cost of running things and stuff like that in next Friday's live stream, maybe, because we just have 15 minutes left. So, Ferdy, save up that question and let's talk about it in the Finsweet Plus session next week. What do you think? Because I think that I can gather some more info. I can show you exactly, all the services behind the curtains and the amount of times that are being loaded, etc. What do you think? Let's keep let's keep working on this. Let's keep
Yeah.
explaining the server. So the server, there's actually a bit of overhead right now happening here, and let me explain. Originally, the server was a Node.js Express server. So actually, it was an Express server built on top of a Node.js instance that was hosted in Google App Engine. So using Google Cloud, Google Cloud App Engine, like that. Okay, this is how originally it was built before I came to the team. In the team, okay. There's been some migration happening since I joined the team, and this is still an ongoing effort. But now we've got a different version of the server that it's not running on a Node.js instance, but instead it's using serverless functions. In this case, we use Vercel, but Vercel it's a AWS wrapper. So essentially, Vercel uses AWS Lambda in the background, like that. And we don't use Express anymore. We use Hono. So Hono, it's this library that for the ones that you're joining the live streams, the technical live streams, you probably know it already. I love this library because it just uses the web standards with requests and responses, etc. It's way more modern than Express.js. It simplifies many things. It's way more faster, and it's a joy to work with, honestly. So we use Hono, and this is deployed in Vercel, like that. So this is still an ongoing migration. So what we did is we implemented an additional reverse proxy that it's essentially we've got this um, small reverse proxy that it's taking the inputs of the requests and it decides if a request should go either to the old server or to the new server, depending on if the that specific module has been migrated to the new approach like this. So this is a bit could be a bit weird, but it's actually been super helpful to do a progressive migration instead of migrating everything at once and hoping for the best, of things not breaking. What we did was, okay, let's go small step by step, and let's do that. And so far, it's working great. And we're actually almost ready to ditch this. So in about a couple weeks from now, there's not going to be any more Express.js, all this stuff. It's going to go away. And we're just going to stick to serverless functions with Vercel, which there's a couple benefits of it. First of all, it's that it has infinite scaling. So we don't really care anymore about the amount of times that the amount of sites that are hitting our server. We don't need to handle any instances. We don't need to scale that up, etc. Because serverless functions, you can just infinitely scale them. And then it's just convenience. We can move these functions from different regions. So, for example, for GDPR compliance and stuff like that, we can put those functions in different places. It's easier to work with. We don't worry about the server crashing, having to restart the server, having to track the uptime of the server, all the stuff. It's really way more simple with serverless functions. So far, it's been great. And Glenn's saying it's been a super smooth transition from a user point of view. Yeah, appreciate that. Really, there's been quite a lot of work going on here to make sure that that does that that doesn't happen. And so far, I think that we're doing a good job. Okay, great. So, how about we jump into the configurator? What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you have any questions so far, Emmanuel?
Yeah, I do, specifically about the configurator. So we're using Vue.js in the configurator.
Correct. Yeah.
And are we using any SSR framework? And yeah, why or why not?
Correct. Okay. So, as Emmanuel said, everything that you see here, it's using Vue.js. Okay. So the framework. So if in case that you don't know it, you can go to vuejs.org. This is a framework like React, like Svelte, like
Like
Angular,
Wized.
like Solid, like many, like West. Yeah, but it's actually different because this one it does not work with Webflow. This works, you build things from scratch in this particular case. So we're using Vue.js to power the whole UI and the whole logic that goes into generating the actions and etc. And we don't use any SSR, so we don't use Nuxt.js. Okay. The reason for that is because we haven't had the need for it. So essentially, no SSR because we really don't have any public facing things. So everything that you load here whenever you go into the configurator, it's behind a login, right? So this is nothing that people are accessing through, a marketing side, and we don't want it to be SEO friendly. We don't need to care about all these things. And we've got a dedicated server already that it's implemented to handle things from the configurator, but also from the main sites, right? So we've also haven't had the need to have a server-side rendering framework for the configurator yet. Okay, but we still have some of the benefits that you would get from SSR. For example, the configurator uses dynamic loading, dynamic imports, dynamic routing, dynamic loading. I don't know how to call it. So essentially, in the configurator, you don't load everything at once. So when you go here in the configurator, you're right now, for example, we're just loading the logic for the dashboard. So only the dashboard is being constructed and it's being generated here with JavaScript. But then when you go inside a project, when you do this, then it dynamically loads the all the JavaScript for the configurator. So in terms of performance, it's still suitable to do things on the front end. It's completely fine. If in the future we need, to have some more control because there are some things that really need to be server side rendered, we might do it. But at this point, we don't. We just use Vue.js in this case. Darshila asking, looks great. Are we planning to release a feature in the future to let the user select the region location for the server hosting? Um, that's been brought up a bunch of times. And although I cannot say that we're going to do it, I can say that it's on the table. So we've been thinking about it. So if we have any advances on this, we'll let you know. But right now, what's happening is I think that we moved those for GDPR compliance. We moved all the serverless functions into Europe, I believe. I'm pretty sure of it. So essentially, anytime that something is hitting our server, it's happening in Europe. So for data privacy compliance and all that stuff. But allowing people to select different regions could be one thing that we could consider in the future. I'm not saying that we're gonna do it. I'm just saying that we're gonna
Yeah.
consider because there's been people asking for it.
One thing to add here is
Yeah.
that we are not really storing any private data. We're just processing it. Um,
Correct.
so it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter where the configuration is
Yeah.
stored, right?
Yeah. Correct. Well, technically, as the laws reflect now, it wouldn't matter. But still, if you're a processor, you probably want to be in Europe to comply with data privacy in Europe, because as a data processor, there's still some personal info that could be coming from the websites,
Yeah.
because maybe a developer implemented a form where a user can input some personal data, and that form maybe it's going through our server because it uses an Airtable request or something, so it goes through our server. In that case, we're processing it, so that's why we want to be in Europe in this particular case. Okay, so let's keep talking a bit
Nicola
more about.
Toledo is asking, sorry,
Go ahead.
Nicola Toledo is asking, are you planning to replace Vue.js with Webflow and Wized?
Yeah, that would be the dream. So ideally, we would be dogfooding the app, right? So it's been built from scratch, and now that we've got the whole thing, now we build it with Wist. That could be cool, actually. So far, we haven't done it, Nicola, because there's so much work behind here that it wouldn't happen in a week. It would need months of developing. But I think that we could try something. That being said, I want to emphasize, because I know that that question is coming, like, hey, can you build with Wist, right? And the answer is yes, but probably you don't want to. Okay? And let me explain that. Every project has the right tool for it. So there are things that are meant to be done, in a low code environment. There are things that are meant to be done in a no code environment. There are things that need to be coded from scratch because there's a level of complexity that certain tools cannot help you with it. So from the range of things that you could build with Wist, going from zero complexity, whoops, zero complexity to 100 complexity, Wist it's probably going to land something like that in here. So you could do probably up to 70% complexity, things like that. Okay. But there's this remaining bit that you probably have a very specific use case that you really need to build things from scratch, right? And at that certain point, using a tool like Wist or any other low-code tool that you could think of, like Bubble or WeWeb or whatever, doesn't make sense. You need to build things from scratch because you are essentially creating something. You're not doing something that already exists, like maybe an LMS or a dashboard or things that can be built with low to medium complexity. You're doing things that it's an advanced complexity because it's being built from the ground up, and that requires a lot of coding. So at that point, using a low code tool, it doesn't make sense anymore. So whoever is telling you that with a low code tool you could build anything, kind of, you could do it, but it's at certain point it might not be a good idea because you'll be fighting against the tool instead of creating things. So that's it. It's better to be real and not try to um, like try to do everything with a single tool. You actually need to pick the right tool for the job. And in this particular case, I would not build the entire configurator with Wist. Did that sound
What
bad?
are
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, so for some very complex use cases, it doesn't make sense to use a local tool. But what would be some functionalities? Do you have something in the top of your mind that something that was implemented in the Wiz configurator
Yeah.
that would be very difficult to build with Wiz,
Yeah. And
or
actually, maybe
impossible
then,
even?
yeah. And maybe I can do a sneak peek of something that we could dive deep in the next live stream. And it's how the configuration system works. So here, every time that you create an action, you can see here how we're getting different options based on the whatever you're selecting, etc. The amount of different combinations here, it's huge. It's exponential because the more options that we add, the more options that are compatible each other, the more different combinations you can get here, right? So in this particular case, building this rather simple settings panel that it looks like, because you can see how it's just a settings panel, right? You just have a few inputs, you can add a name, you can select a folder, maybe you can select an attribute. But the thing is that the more things that you select here, the more things that start to pop up. And if you start changing things, all the options change. So, we needed some kind of smart way to build this. The hard way, like the way that you would probably build it in West, would be to define every single condition. Like, okay, if the user inputs this, then show this input, and if you select this option, then show this input. But then the problem is that maybe if you change this, then there are some other inputs that you need to show, etc. So it's pretty complex, right? So the way that we do it in the configurator is by defining a schema. And let me show you. So we've got here in the apps, and this is like a sneak peek of the code base. And we've got a full config schema that it's defining all the different settings that you can get. So let's look, for example, at the B2 settings. We've got actions, apps, data, requests. Let's look at an action. Maybe I don't know, the visibility action. So essentially, actually, let's look at maybe this. So we've maybe I can zoom out a bit. So we've got a full schema that defines all the different settings. Like, hey, okay, the attributes field must be displayed when the config type is an element, and the fields that you should be displaying is this specific field. Or if, for example, let's go to a request. It's gonna show you some more things. So let's do REST, for example, or Firebase. Let's do Firebase. So in here, we've got a schema that says, okay, so anytime that the user has selected a Firebase app and there is selected one of these methods like get list, create, update, set, delete, then I want to display these fields. Please display the function for the path, and this is a function, or display a field number for the limit, or display the checkbox to define if it's real time, or display another checkbox if we should merge fields. So this whole schema ends up being converted to, whoops, come on, to what I'm displaying here, right? So if I'm creating a Firebase, I need to see these fields in particular. If I'm creating now a Firebase request, oops, I didn't save it. Like this, and I create a request using Firebase and I get an item. I have to get this path, or if I create an item, I have to get this path, but then there's these repeatable fields here, so I can keep adding more fields. And then in here, I can select if it's a timestamp, and then I can return a function here with the timestamp, etc. So all of this, it's quite a lot of work to do one by one. And instead, we've got a full engine that it's built from scratch, and it's deciding, it's conditionally rendering the fields based on the config that it's being generated. Does that make sense? So that's one of the
Yeah.
cool,
So
one cool thing that we've done, but that it's quite complex and it needed, that creating it from scratch instead of using a tool for it.
yeah.
Go ahead, sorry, cut
So
you.
basically, if components, if we could sort of generate components with Wized and build an engine that will take care of generating these components, then Wized might be feasible for something like that. Otherwise, it's much better to stick with code.
Yeah, it's depending on the goal.
The
There are
use
some goals
case
that can be
also.
achieved. Yeah, the use case. Like there are many things that can be achieved with no code or low code, but there are things that you really need to build from scratch that you could build with those other tools, but creating a solution from scratch in some cases makes sense, like in this particular system that I'm talking about, because
Yeah.
it's a very specific use case that you need to to develop thinking about what you're trying to solve from scratch. Okay.
So to sum up, if we're trying to build an LMS, an interactive course, if we're trying to build a cool
Many different things,
dashboard
yeah.
or something like that, Wized is perfect for that. But if there's a lot of dynamic components that need to be generated, not just rendered, but generated based on different inputs and so on, then it's better to go with the traditional approach.
Yeah, so it depends on the level of complexity. As I said, I
Yeah.
think that Wiz can go up to 70-80% of the use cases, but there's always going to be that last 20% where you need to build things from scratch. And we are not trying to cover that. Wiz, it's never going to cover that. There are things that, the right tool for everything. That's it. Correct. Okay. It's actually time. Emmanuel, do you want to say anything before we stop here?
Yeah, I'm excited about part two. Like, this has been really amazing, really insightful. And there's a lot of questions that I would still like to cover. So, yeah, looking forward to, having a second chat about this.
Nice. Yeah, I thank everyone to stay here with us. Actually, we still have 40 people, and I'm love to see that there's people interested in what we've built, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for staying here with us. Next Friday, we're going to do a Finsweet Plus session where feel free to ask any questions, anything you want to know about the app, anything about a particular service, how to set it up, what's it costing us, how much usage it's having. I will try to disclosure. I don't know the word.
Disclose.
As much. Oh, thanks. As much as I can during that Finsweet Plus session. So don't mess it up. You can apply if you're not a Finsweet Plus user. You can go to finsweet.com/plus, and in here you will get the full info about what you're getting with Finsweet Plus. Okay, up to you. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice weekend. Emmanuel, do you want to say anything before we end here?
Thanks, everyone, for jumping in. It was a pleasure having you and having this chat. And I hope to see you soon, guys. Until
Hard
next time.
dance party. Hey, see you. See you. Bye.